Well, thank you everybody for joining. This is Show Me the Money, Monetizing Voice, Part 2. This three-part series, this is the second of three, explores the financial component of the growing voice industry, namely where the money will be found and how, through voice. And we'll discuss brands and agencies and how they can justify the investment in voice with examples of enterprise, B2B, B2C use cases that focus on revenue and its generation, along with operational efficiency and cost reduction. And we hope today to dive into direct revenue, and I expect a little help from Alan on that topic, leading the way towards a robust discussion of that. I do have some Linux Foundation mandated business to take care of, which I will do, and then I will introduce our distinguished panel. We should go about 30 minutes with about 15 minutes for Q&A. Attendees can post their questions in the chat, and we will get to them as we can. We do have a distinguished panel of experts today, and I will ask them to just be patient as I read the following. Linux Foundation meetings involve participation by industry competitors, and it is the intention of the Linux Foundation to conduct all of its activities in accordance with the applicable antitrust and competition laws. It is therefore extremely important that attendees adhere to meeting agendas and be aware of and not participate in any activities that are prohibited under applicable US, state, federal, or foreign antitrust and competition laws. Examples of types of actions prohibited at Linux Foundation meetings and in connection with Linux Foundation activities are described in the Linux Foundation antitrust policy, available at linuxfoundation.org/antitrust-policy. If you have questions about these matters, please contact your company counsel, or if you are a member of the Linux Foundation, please feel free to reach out to Andrew Updegrove of the firm of Gesmer Updegrove LLP, which provides legal counsel to the foundation. Now to the intros. I have to tell you, I could not be more excited about the expertise that we have before us today. I think a lot of people spend $70,000 or $80,000 a year to get the kind of education we're going to get here today from this panel of experts. First, Dr. Rupal Patel, an internationally renowned speech scientist turned entrepreneur and educator, brings decades of clinical, academic, scientific, and social entrepreneurship experience to Veritone, and as vice president of voice and accessibility there, Rupal leads strategy and innovation efforts in the use of voice AI for media and entertainment, in addition to expanding the reach and impact of Veritone's voice solutions for those living with disabilities or inequities. She's a preeminent thought leader in voice, advocates for ethical, transparent, and fair use policies that can broaden the monetization capabilities for voiceover artists by leveraging AI. So, welcome.
Thank you.
Next, Brandon Kaplan. He is an entrepreneur, speaker, strategist, and the CEO of Skilled Creative, working with brands like PepsiCo, Pfizer, Wall Street Journal, Entertainment Weekly, All Recipes, Simon & Schuster, and many, many more. He is one of the most widely respected experts in voice, and he is also Chief Innovation Officer of Journey, the agency of the Futurescape. Since founding Skilled Creative, Brandon has been a trailblazer, inventing and implementing new ways companies can harness voice and AI technologies to capture greater value. Dedicated always to being ahead of technology's advance, Kaplan's campaigns for leading brands play a significant part in growing the voice channel to its multi-billion-dollar scale. In the multidisciplinary agency that Journey is, voice will merge with other impactful emergent technologies to deliver exceptional energy. And we hope to hear more and more about that from you today, Brandon. So welcome.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you having me.
Full disclosure, I serve as a strategic advisor to Skilled Creative, and I know Brandon quite well. So it's important for me to say that out loud. Alan Firstenberg, project guru at Objective Consulting. He is one of the most well-known and highly regarded authorities in voice, senior project engineer at Objective, which I mentioned, where he's been instrumental in creating websites and mobile apps for the likes of the American Booksellers Association and the National Science Foundation. He is an author, a speaker, and both a developer expert for Google Plus and wearables. With Mark Tucker, he hosts the podcast, Two Voice Devs, available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. And to finish up with Alan, I don't know anyone else who takes such joy in helping and educating others in the voice space as much as Alan does. It just radiates. So thank you, Alan, for joining us.
Thanks for having me here.
So we can begin. I'm going to kick it off and, I don't know, maybe dust up a little bit of controversy, see if we get some differing viewpoints. And Alan, please, if I ever go too much off the rails, and I'm not talking enough about direct revenue, bring me back. I'm happy to be driven. So I'd like to start off with Rupal, then Alan, then Brandon on this following idea, this concept. So we've all had discussions about the likely trajectory of growth, voice in media, advertising, customer service. But what about this? Is voice for voice sakes really a thing? Is it not all it's cracked up to be as a standalone? What do you think?
Voice for voice sake. You want to unpack that for me a little bit?
I will. Okay. So is it more voice as an input, as an element of marketing, as a something that makes the process more responsive and targeted, rather than, you know, this webinar is called Monetizing Voice, but is it always an obvious transaction? Voice for money, or does it represent a part of something else where a transaction exists? Where would you stand on that?
I think voice is one of the most natural methods of communication. And I think, you know, to say voice for voice sake would be like to say, is it humans that are interacting in this interaction of, you know, monetization? And so if there's a natural way for humans to interact, it's through voice. And I believe actually the ways that we have been trying to, I don't know, get commerce or get entertainment or whatever, and in other ways through clicks and buttons and text and so on, those are all proxies for what we'd like to do and what comes easiest and most natural for us to do. So for me, I feel like voice is just that we just now actually have a way to do it in a way that is efficient, that is at least, you know, in terms of the synthesis side, good enough to, and believable enough. I think the technologies had to develop a little bit, and even speech recognition, you know, wasn't best in noisy environments, and those technologies needed to develop, but we were still doing voice-based interactions in normal monetization activities all the time. So to bring this into the digital sphere or the virtual sphere is just sort of like where that natural trajectory needed to go. So I'm excited about what voice does. And I think it opens up not just what we've been doing in the physical world, but now in the virtual world with voice, we can do so much more that we never actually imagined we can do if you're just typing, or if you're point and clicking, or accessing information, or even interacting in different ways.
Yeah, I guess where the question came from, and thank you for your answer, it's good, was, you know, for a long time we talked about voice first, and there was voice tech, but we never really talked about type first or click tech. It has taken on, voice has taken on sort of the mantle of social and mobile and, you know, other great movements in technology. And so I wanted to sort of zoom in on that question a little bit.
Can I expand on that one just one bit? I think one of the ways that I can see that it feels incremental at times is because sometimes we're applying voice as just the next layer. So we might be taking something that was done by text or done in some other way, and we're just saying, well, let's now make it voiced. And I think that's where voice is being used in actually a very incremental way and not in a creative way. So you can't just take all copy and text that existed before and just, transfer it over to voice, because A, it'll feel really unnatural, and B, that's not how voice is used. Like, we don't just read out things that we say. And when we're conversing like this, if I was to read out my notes and, really read out every single thing, it sounds very contrived. And so there's a different way to use voice, and it's not just carrying over what text did. And so I think that is, if we're doing that, we're doing voice for voice sake. But the potential for where voice is way bigger than voice for voice sake.
Right.
I would agree with almost everything Rupal said, unsurprisingly. I want to kind of key on one of the things you said, though, Donald, and that's that, we didn't have a touch first. We didn't have a type first. We did have a mobile first, though. And part of what came out of the mobile first movement is this notion that mobile itself was a different modality. It was a different way of doing things. And once we started getting used to that way of doing things, we were no longer bound by saying, well, we have to use a mouse. We have to use our desktop machines. Once we started thinking of what mobile could do is when we really started doing amazing things with mobile. And I think kind of what Rupal said at the end there, once we start thinking about what we can do with voice, even what we can do right now with voice, I think we really are going to start understanding how voice and voice first and all of these things really give us that ambient and ubiquitous way of doing things, which is different than what we were ever able to do before with mobile devices, with web-based devices, with keyboard-based devices. I think when we start understanding that is really when we're going to see voice taking off as a creature on its own. And that's really exciting. We're seeing glimmers of that now, but only glimmers. And to tie it back to the show me the money part, when we start understanding that point is when we're going to be able to make significant money from the voice first movement. In the same way that once we started understanding mobile, we were able to make money with mobile. And once we really started understanding the web, we were able to make money with the web.
Right. So where are we in the teenage years? Are we in the preteens? In terms of the scale of growth of voice before the delivery of money, is there a timeline or an arc? If you wanted to venture a guess, 2 years, 5 years?
If I was to kind of map it to where we are in relation to what it looked like on the web, for example, we are in the pre-Amazon days. There were people making money on the web before Amazon, but nobody really got it.
Right.
And when Amazon hit, they showed an entirely different way of making money using the web. And I kind of think that's where we are right now. We don't have that killer app yet. We don't have that Google. We don't have that Amazon of voice yet, which is kind of ironic in some ways.
And interesting, because I recall Amazon kind of building its business on the backs of those others who were selling things on the web, and you'd get your 8% commission if you carried an Amazon banner on your website. And it really fostered the growth of Amazon. People became accustomed to buying. Sorry, is my audio coming through okay? Just gotta.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Sorry, I got a weak signal, which terrified me. Weak signal notification. Brandon, would you like to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, all good answers far. I think, the build on that is, I think people get a little confused because they're trying to fit voice into a previous bucket. And when we talk to partners and prospects and clients and tech partners, whoever it may be, we say, well, we look at voice in two different ways, right? It's a channel in some ways, in that Amazon and Google have created a channel for us. Apple has created a channel for us, and you have to kind of fit into how they've designed that channel. So if I'm going to be in the Amazon voice channel, I need to live in the ways that Amazon wants me to live in their voice channel, which is very different than the Google voice channel and the Apple voice channel. And so it's a channel, but maybe more importantly, voice is a user interface also. And so we need to think about it as a user interface across all other modalities. And so you have to look at it through these different lenses. And you know, Don, because we talk about this a lot, but we've always said voice is a program, not a project. And so voice for voice sake is, I want to do a voice thing. I want to build a voice project. I'm going to make it. It's going to go out there. It's going to change my business. It's thinking that the voice channel was going to emulate the Amazon app marketplace, which the skill marketplace wasn't intended, it wasn't going to emulate the app marketplace. And so we holistically think of it as a program, and that especially around monetization, there's top of funnel monetization in the consumer journey, and there's very bottom of funnel monetization. And so sometimes we create a program that is just a voice activation that lives on its own, that is hyper focused on getting someone to say something that is as close as possible to a voice commerce transaction. And that's a voice activation on its own, voice for voice sake. And we've seen good performance there. But in other instances, we say, well, voice needs to be a key touch point in an omni-channel campaign. And it's very successful in top of funnel engagement, or collecting a phone number or an email address, or unlocking a promo code for someone, or giving follow-up information, or onboarding someone. And so in that sense, it can function on its own, voice for voice sake, but it can also function very well as part of a user journey, as a high quality touch point. And so we don't pinpoint it as just one thing. It's many things.
Yeah, it's kind of astounding to me that so few brands are optimizing their destinations for voice search, when Google tells us that something like better than 40% of all search is done via voice. Yet at their own peril, brands are just not optimizing, and there's only one right answer. Alan?
I mean, I would say in some ways, yes, that's surprising, but it's also not surprising, since even though Google has been saying for years to optimize your sites for mobile, tons and tons of sites are still not optimized for mobile. And people have yet to catch up on that notion. And I think it's slow going. And it's why, when people are already talking about how, clearly voice is dead because nobody's doing these things, nobody's doing them for mobile. And I don't think anybody's saying that mobile is dead.
Right.
Yeah. Right. And I would contend it's because it's still so nascent. Like, we do what we call voice search assessment and optimization for a lot of our clients. There is no framework. There is no book that anyone on our team could purchase to read best practices. There's no SaaS product that we can plug into that can scrape voice. If anything, the platforms make it as difficult as possible for you to kind of make assessments within their platform. So we're building independently our own kind of metrics and tools to do voice SEO. And then we're going to our clients and saying, hey, like, here's some interesting ways that we figured it out. It's a lot of just shooting in the dark and stitching together your own playbook. And that'll lead to eventually tools and services that are very defined and very replicable. But to Alan's point, if we're thinking about, people have been getting told to optimize for mobile for more than a decade, and they're still not doing it. And there are lots of tools and processes and playbooks for mobile, and people still aren't doing it. We're living like before those playbooks were even written. So we're just very patient with it. It's going to be very important. The platforms all behave very differently. And it's a long game on this one, but it's going to be very important.
I agree. It's a long game. And I also think that voice, the definition of voice. So, is voice about voice input? Is voice about voice output? Is voice about the language understanding in between? What is voice? So when people are talking about voice, we're often talking about different parts of voice. And so that's also another thing in terms of what part, are we trying to monetize? What are we trying to make easier for users? I think, in terms of, I love this analogy, Brandon, about sort of voice as a channel, voice as a user interface. I'd also think about voice as a medium and voice as a social connector, right? And so far we've been thinking about voice being used as broadcast mode, right? Basically, you have some information, you want to broadcast that information, a voice speaks it out loud to everybody the same way. But, the potential for voice to speak differently to different users so that it actually connects with them on the output side is actually really, really valuable. And if you think about it, there's, a good part of the world, 40–50% of the world is not literate. They can't even access information that's text-based. They're not even maybe even on broadband internet, whereas voice is a potential to increase the catchment of all the people that you can reach. And so the market potential is massive for voice. And I think it's really untapped. I feel like right now we are in the stage, going back to your question of what stage are we in? We're in that stage of learning to walk in the dark. Talk or speak a new language, because I think we're a little distracted by some of the shiny objects. So, could you use voice for this cool application in entertainment or this cool thing over here? And we're forgetting that those things are great in terms of, if you're talking about sort of longer term scale of monetization, they show some value, but they're great, I think, as use cases, but not necessarily for long tail or for not long tail, but mass adoption. Because I think we have to have another sort of killer use case for where we're kind of all in the same boat in that way, sort of feeling our way through what is the right thing. I think for a long time it was conversational agents and headless speakers that we were trying to figure out what skill, what voice skill, and so on and so forth. I think we've moved beyond that a little bit, but we still don't know what that next foray is. That is, the reliable, repeatable thing that's not contact center. Like, it's not just taking something we knew and making it a little bit more operationally efficient. It's a step function change is what we're looking for.
So would social audio qualify as that mass platform? Maybe it's not there yet. Maybe it's tripping and stumbling along a little bit. It's not AI necessarily, although there are elements of AI. Response to that?
So social audio, in my opinion, is kind of living on the edges. It's an audio format. It's an audio platform. It's not conversational AI. It could become conversational AI in the future if bots could live in there and host and interact. But our podcast's voice, no, kind of, sometimes maybe a little bit. It's all evolving, and to throw in, I've loved everyone's answer on like where we are, so I'm gonna put my little 2 cents in there as well. As soon as you asked that question, I wrote down we're at the AOL disk phase. Like, when you had to insert an AOL disk into your computer to get internet, and it had very limited functionality, a lot of people adopted it, but it was a very disparate experience, very siloed experience. If someone picked up the phone while you were on that, your internet got disrupted and you got kicked out. You could do only few things. They weren't interconnected. Of the Fortune 500s, probably a small percentage of them had their data inserted in the right way. And so if I go to an Alexa device today, it feels a lot like those days. It's nothing feels connected. There's some good information there. I try and do one thing and it doesn't really work correctly. And you can't even imagine having to go through that experience on the internet today. Like, to try and get someone to go through that AOL disk experience today on the internet, they throw their computer out the window. And so imagine that we're in that friction phase of voice where nothing is really connected. Companies haven't integrated their structured data correctly, where Alexa's knowledge graph is perfect, and cars and Google, and God willing, we'll look back in 5 or 10 years and go, okay, cool. Like, it's all really connected and there's a lot of more data available. I asked my voice device downstairs this morning for an update on Hurricane Ian, and it gave me like a silent video on a screen device and then gave me like celebrity updates. This is like yeah, that was a miss, right? And it's just because the data wasn't available. It's early. We're still very early, but it doesn't mean there's not tens of millions of people using those siloed experiences every day and getting a lot of value out of it. So anyway, those are my maybe 3 cents on that.
So we do have some questions that are popping up in the chat, which seems to be working. But first I wanted to throw this out for anyone really, or all. What about synthetic? I'll go one better. A couple of examples that might constitute direct revenue. So there's a company that is currently working with hedge funds, which does tonal analysis of quarterly earnings reports, listening to the voices of the CEO, the CFO, the COO, and does deep tonal analysis, measuring for intent and confidence, listening to cadence. They have 100 or so factors. So it seems to me that is a direct response to the voice transaction. It is directly tied to the capabilities of vocal analysis or tonal analysis using AI. Now, on the other side of it, can you imagine in the synthetic media space that voice might become currency, that voice might be traded, it might be licensed, it might make individuals, instead of TikTok videos, there might be revenue opportunities for voice inside some future synthetic arena or space. I'm not saying the M word, but you know what I mean.
Can I go first on that one? I absolutely think that on the synthetic side, it's already happening where the talent are going to monetize their voice, whether that's, the celebrity talent or even, voiceover talent. They should be monetizing their voice, and they are. I think we're starting to see a little bit more of that as voice starts to penetrate these markets. And absolutely, and I think we're going to be using our voice in the various different worlds and being able to be in multiple places simultaneously in our virtual world versus in person, right? So it's not just sharing the same podcast or the same recorded sample over and over again. It can be new creative media. And I think this is something that's kind of a little bit hard for us to wrap our heads around because it's a little bit new of a concept. But we've seen it in sci-fi movies already, right? So if it's been in sci-fi, it probably is going to be real about 20 years from now or 10 years from now at the rate that we're going. On the end of the hedge fund, I was actually just talking to, I don't know if it's the same fund you're referring to or not, somebody about the CEO calls and also tone analysis, not only in that vertical, but in other areas where you're trying to glean something from voice. I think voice is an incredibly rich channel for us to mine for affect, for intentions, for health biomarkers. I think there's a lot of information in voice, and there we are not fully taking advantage of all the cues. We're actually only looking for, I think in these tone analyses is really just looking at the pitch change and some of these changes, but there's more to it. I think we're just at the tip of the iceberg there. That data alone is super valuable. The data on what is happening so that we can kind of gear other decisions around money and around decision-making, I think is going to be hugely valuable. I was just at a conference last week at the Inner Speech Conference in Korea, which brought together over 2,000 people virtually and in person, people working in these fields. And one of the biggest exhibitors or groups of companies that were exhibiting were data providers, data set providers. So if you think about data in voice, that there's monetization right there. And I don't know if the other guests have other ways in which we can monetize here as well.
Alan's nodding vigorously to that last point.
Well, I think the last point I think is one of the biggest ones that I think about when I think about monetization is if we are selling data already, and that's largely what most companies are trying to do when they're selling something, is we're selling data. Uber is basically selling data on where the nearest car is.
Right.
If we start thinking about things like that, it does go back to what data is out there that we can now attach to voice and produce something new and directly sell that. A lot of the clients that I work with, it isn't so much how do we create a brand new app or program or voice channel thing. It's how do we take our existing content and enhance it in a way that it becomes more useful by attaching it to voice. And with some clients, that's, well, you already have, 5-second or 10-second or 30-second audio clips. How do we now attach that to something so that the user gets more benefit out of it than just in the clip, how it was before? And those are the questions that I work with my clients, is try to get them, to say, oh, we already have all of this audio that we're already producing. How do we now put that in a new and different audio channel? If you think about radio stations and television stations, who at one point asked, well, okay, we have this audio and video content. How do we put it in YouTube? How do we take advantage of YouTube to monetize it, to make it better, to get more, more people channeling to the TV station or the radio station? Or how do we directly sell it? Those are the questions, and that created the streaming industry and the streaming wars that we now have. What's that same sort of evolution with voice? With maybe it's going to be conversational, maybe it's not. But if we talk about it as conversational, with all of this audio content that we have, how do we make that conversational? What is it like to talk to the morning DJ? I don't know. I have ideas, but I don't know what that's like. And, Brandon has ideas, I'm sure. But those are the things that I think we need to start heading down when we start talking direct revenue.
So, yeah. Brandon, I will ask you to answer that question. I just want to, there are a couple of questions that were directed directly to you that I just want to mention. One from John Stein, and a similar question for the entire panel from Janice Mandel, who's joined us today. So specifically, your bet, Brandon, in the next 12 to 24 months as to areas within business processes, within the journey, do you think are worthy to explore? Oh, there's a second question for Alan, which we'll come back to. But if you want to go back to the last topic, please feel free, Brandon.
Yeah, I think fortunately they're very interconnected. And I think about, you're bringing up a synthetic voice, a sentiment analysis, a data around audio capture. We're also talking about consumer experiences. And I think much like other modalities or other UIs, there's a front end consumer facing endpoint, and then there's a back end kind of enterprise endpoint. If you go into a retail store, it better look nice. The shelves better be stocked well. It better have good music and good lighting. And that's the consumer experience. But there's also heat tracking technology that's tracking where people go in the store and where they stop and how much time they spend there, and what their facial sentiment is in the store. And you can adjust store layout. If I go to a website, the UI better be really good. The UX better be really good. And there's eye tracking technology that'll see what am I looking at, and it allows designers to edit those consumer experiences. I think in voice, you're going to have the exact same thing. There's a lot of consumer-facing experiences that need to be developed in a meaningful way. And then the data that we're collecting on the back end informs not just how to improve those experiences, but informs behaviors for your organizations in general. And so I can create a really meaningful voice commerce experience, and that better be a good user flow. But if I can track the sentiment and the types of queries that people are dropping in, that's really valuable data for the organization to consider across their whole business. So there's this whole front end and back end. And in terms of the things that we think are exciting to invest in, we're less on kind of the enterprise side of things. We're much more on the consumer facing side of things within our organization. We're hyper focused on several different ways to really, in a meaningful way, activate voice commerce, whether that's through the known channels or web or other modalities. We're very focused on unpacking voice search in a meaningful way to get people into that flow, that funnel. And then in the middle, there's all those consideration elements in terms of, voice is pretty good at collecting user data. Like, people are really willing to give you phone numbers and email addresses. It's a really friendly platform for CRM collection. And so we're focused on strengthening our understanding of, awareness, consideration, conversion, and then turning those into best practices for our clients. And all of those ladder up to commerce and monetization in some way.
You know, I could go on for hours. It's already 36 minutes into it. So why don't we jump to some questions? Let's see. Janice Mandel. It's a valid concern. What happens with our personal data when we use voice? And that's directly tied to monetization. I remember, and Janice will remember this, when we were researching a white paper together, there was a Gartner study a couple of years ago that indicated that in my former business, streaming television and a little bit of movies, that if you give consumers the opportunity to completely control their personal data, their security, they are 40% or greater less likely to churn out. So retention rates stay high if you give this gift of control over personal information and security to the consumers. So what does happen with our personal data when we use voice? Anybody want to take that one?
I think some of that is really going to boil down to how useful it ends up being for the end user. If and how much risk they feel like they are putting themselves in. You know, if they are now able to say a whole bunch of things, but they get very little value out of that, they're going to be a lot more concerned about whether, you know, where's this data going? Whereas if we can show them that data is being collected, but is of immense value directly to them. One of the examples I'd love to give is that people are very, very comfortable with turning location services on as part of Android. Almost everyone leaves location services on, and part of the reason is because they like using GPS. They like having Android tell them, hey, if you take this other route, you'll save 5 minutes. They like that. And in return of giving where my information is, I get to know where everyone else is in an anonymized way. That's a trade-off that we're okay doing because we get tremendous benefit from it. Whereas if I'm giving voice information and the only thing I get back is that I now have my voice agent call me by my name, I'm going to be wondering what's going on. And that was the question that people did start asking as Alexa and Google Assistant and Siri started being out there, and as the information was revealed that, hey, these devices are listening to you and somebody's on the other end listening to those recordings, right. People started saying, well, what am I getting out of this?
Right.
Until we answered that question, what am I getting out of this? People are going to be suspicious.
Rupal, I know that's a big concern of yours, transparency and ethics. What do you say to all this?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think we have to approach this from the consumer perspective, right? Or the end user perspective, whether that's a business or an individual. If there's no need that we're fulfilling with that application, then it really is. Let's take banking, for example. You know, I know what voice is, and I am very reluctant to use voice banking. Meaning using my voice to bank, you know, to financial with financial organizations. I don't like it. I don't, because the only thing that I'm giving them is I'm giving them data, but there's nothing that, and they're reducing they're basically reducing their costs by having me use, you know, voice biometrics to enter my account and so on and so forth. And I find that kind of a little bit like, well, that saves you money, but it doesn't do anything for me. Why am I doing it? So the what's in it for me is actually very important, not just from a user perspective, but, you know, at Veritone, we think a lot about like business to business, right? It has to also fit that need for the businesses. What's in it for them? Why is it that they'd want to use voice? Why is it that their customers will want to use voice at the end of the day? And I think that's an important piece that right now, I think we're in this. What happens with any new technology or any new sort of phase, I think, is we start imagining the world kind of like where we were, and then we start saying, well, what if this new tool could be used for all these things that we've been doing? So that's the first phase, right? Of, what if voice for this? And so there's a lot of people that kind of throw out these ideas of what if voice for this and what if voice for that? And it's not, that's an exploratory phase. I think it's after that that we go, oh my goodness, it was right under our nose. We never even realized that we could use voice in this categorically different way that we've never used some other modalities, because it's a unique modality. It's a different modality, right? And so I think, I think about things like, if you are a brand, and you are talking to your end users today, you're kind of talking in one monolithic voice. Why? Because we never imagined you could talk with 15 voices. It was too costly to do that, whether they were human voices or synthetic voices or whatever, or didn't work. But every market, when I talk to my grandmother, my mother, my kids, my coworkers, I talk in a slightly different voice to each of those people, right? And so understanding the psychology and the power of this tool, I think, is really important to think about. How can you broaden the aperture of the audience that you can reach? So how can you broaden that market audience to beyond what you're marketing today, or to talk, or even engaging in a conversation today? I think that's where the potential for this whole new industry is much bigger. It's not reimagining things we have done or done differently, but it's almost like saying, what can we do that we never could do before? And I think that's a way bigger question, and sometimes leads to paths that are dead ends. But I think that's, every industry goes through this, right? I think crypto is going through this as well right now. So there's a lot of places in which new industries go through it, but I think it's until it sort of clicks, there is that exploration part that has to happen.
Great. I think we probably have time for one more. Yeah, I'm being told by the authorities that we should wrap it up pretty soon. So we'll do that. So I think I'm going to wrap it up. I was hoping maybe on some other session to get to some other categories more in depth: education, automotive, retail, health and wellness, media and advertising. We've covered pretty well. Synthetic voice, more about synthetic voice, like our friends at Respeecher. Finance, tonal analytics, we touched on that. Asset management, I know that Veritone has a robust business in that space. Device-based voice technology, we don't talk a lot about that. Location-based voice technology. We'll have to save it for next time, but I wanted to thank each of you for making time. Oh, we have a new message. Let me see if I can. Oh, Michael Novak is saying thank you to all of us. I hope that our attendees and participants took something of value from this. I know I did. It's always a great education to talk to experts in the field. They enhance my knowledge, and they make me a little bit smarter than I was before I got on the call. Part 3, to be dated, probably sometime in late November. And a reminder to those who may have missed part 1, you can see part 1 of Monetizing Voice, Showing the Money Monetizing Voice, on the Open Voice Network site. Thank you all for joining, and thank you again, panelists. It was a real honor and a pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks for having
Thanks very
us.
much.
Well done.